Spring 1945, the dying breath of the Third Reich. Cities lay in ruin, railways cut to pieces, the German army collapsing under the relentless advance of Allied forces. In the Harz Mountains, where the mist hangs low and the forests swallow sound, one of the war's strangest disappearances would take place. Colonel Hans Adler, decorated, disciplined, and dangerously intelligent, was stationed at a remote command post outside Braunlage. His unit was tasked with protecting what Allied intelligence later called a research installation of strategic importance. But before the Allies could reach it, both Adler and the installation simply ceased to exist. The last known record of the colonel's voice came from a distorted radio transmission intercepted by a British signal team on April 27, 1945. The message was brief, calm, and chilling. "If we fail, the future will find us below." Hours later, communication lines from the Harz sector went silent. Reconnaissance aircraft sent to scout the area reported heavy smoke, collapsed tunnel entrances, and what appeared to be scorched ground. Yet no enemy activity, no movement, no bodies. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed an entire regiment. When Allied troops arrived 3 days later, they found the site deserted. Bunkers were empty, equipment left in place, coffee cups still half full. There were no signs of a retreat, no shell casings, no tire tracks. Just an eerie stillness. The logs ended mid-sentence. Maps pinned to the walls bore strange red markings, concentric circles surrounding a single word, Morgenröte, German for dawn. The official report listed Adler as missing in action, presumed dead, along with 31 men under his command. But whispers spread quickly through the ranks. Locals spoke of engines rumbling underground long after the war had ended. Hikers claimed to see faint lights beneath the forest floor at night, and in the years that followed, treasure hunters and historians would descend upon the Harz Mountains, searching for clues to what had really happened in those final chaotic days. None would find anything, only silence, and the lingering feeling that something down there was still waiting to be found. Before his disappearance, Hans Adler was already something of a legend. Born in 1902, he rose rapidly through the ranks, not by brutality, but by precision. Cold, calculating, and fluent in 5 languages, Adler was the kind of officer both feared and respected. His superiors saw him as indispensable, his peers as unknowable. He rarely spoke of his personal life, had no known family, and lived entirely for the Reich's ambitions. Yet beneath the medals and military decorum, there were hints of something else, a fascination with science, technology, and the future of warfare that bordered on obsession. Documents recovered after the war link Adler to several classified initiatives, including Project Morgenröte, a program rumored to explore experimental energy weapons and subterranean facilities designed to outlast the collapse of Germany itself. Allied intelligence dismissed much of it as propaganda, but intercepted memos between Adler and Berlin scientists suggest otherwise. He requested shipments of industrial generators, reinforced steel, and geological survey maps of the Harz region, all under the vague label of continuity infrastructure. By 1944, Adler's name was on every Allied watch list. Yet as the Reich fell apart, so did the trail. His personnel file was burned in a bombing raid. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some said he fled east toward Czechoslovakia. Others swore he stayed behind, guarding something beneath the mountains. British investigators, who later examined the ruins of his outpost, described the layout as unnaturally complex, with sealed corridors leading deep underground. When they tried to open them, the walls caved in as though rigged to collapse. No body was ever recovered, no formal grave was ever found. But what haunted those who studied the case wasn't the lack of evidence, it was what little they did find. A single officer's cap resting on a stone floor, its silver eagle insignia untouched by dust. To this day, historians debate whether Adler died with his men, escaped justice, or achieved something far stranger. In post-war Germany, his name became myth, whispered in taverns and late-night broadcasts as Der Geisteroberst, the Ghost Colonel. And the deeper one looks into his story, the clearer it becomes. Hans Adler didn't just vanish, he erased himself. And perhaps everything he was working on. By May 1945, the war was over, at least on paper. But for the Allied intelligence teams combing through the forests and tunnels of central Germany, victory had only opened new mysteries. Operation Eclipse was the code name for Britain's post-surrender sweep through the Harz Mountains, designed to root out hidden bases, secret research sites, and fleeing high-ranking officers. What they found near Braunlage defied explanation. The area where Colonel Adler's regiment was last seen was littered with twisted steel and half-buried entrances, the remains of an underground network that didn't appear on any military maps. British engineers descended into what tunnels they could safely access. The walls were lined with blackened cables and heavy blast doors melted by heat so intense it warped the bolts. In the debris, investigators recovered fragments of blueprints marked in red ink. Project Morgenröte. Most of the diagrams were incomplete. Sections had been deliberately torn or burned, but recurring notations referenced Phase 2 containment and sub-level expansion. Nearby crates stamped with the Reichsadler emblem contained scientific instruments far beyond typical field use, oscilloscopes, sealed canisters of unknown gas, and reels of magnetic wire etched with indecipherable codes. There were no bodies, no signs of a retreat, not even footprints in the dust. It was as if the soldiers guarding the facility had vanished between one breath and the next. British command ordered the site cordoned off. A team from the Royal Engineers detonated the remaining tunnels to prevent accidents, sealing whatever lay beneath under tons of rock. But in private memos, intelligence officers questioned what they had truly buried. Why had Adler's men destroyed their own research but not their equipment? And what was Project Dawn? A weapon, a shelter, or something else entirely? By winter, the operation was concluded. The remaining documents were stamped classified, ultra, and stored in a Ministry of Defense vault where they would remain untouched for decades. The public report listed the discovery as an abandoned communications bunker, nothing more. But among the men who had been there, those who had stood at the mouth of the tunnels and heard a low, rhythmic hum from somewhere deep below, the official story never silenced the question that haunted them all. If the war had truly ended, why did it? Still sound like something was running beneath the mountains? In the years after the war, the Harz Mountains became quiet again, or appeared to. The forests regrew, concealing the scars of bombings and buried bunkers. Tourists came for the hiking trails and mineral springs, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. But locals did. Hunters spoke of metallic echoes drifting through the valleys at night, the faint thud of machinery under the soil. In the village of Schirke, an old woman claimed her cellar walls sometimes vibrated, as though a train were passing underground. When she reported it to the police, they told her it was settling earth. She swore it was something alive. By the 1950s, scavengers began combing the hills for wartime relics, helmets, medals, spent shells. Some returned with more than souvenirs. A group of teenagers exploring a sealed tunnel near Braunlage found a wall where iron insignia had fused directly into the rock, as if melted there. Another searcher uncovered a rusted Geiger counter that still clicked faintly in his hands. A radiation test conducted years later revealed trace contamination in the surrounding soil, but no one could explain why. Then came the story of the breathing door. In 1962, a hiker named Ernst Keller vanished for 2 days in the forest near Torfhaus. When he reappeared, dehydrated and trembling, he told police he'd followed a narrow path up a ridge and discovered a slab of metal embedded in the cliffside. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse softly, as if exhaling. He'd tried to pry it open, but before he could, A deep hum filled the air, and he lost consciousness. The authorities dismissed it as heat stroke, but Keller never went near the mountains again. Over time, these accounts became local folklore, ghost stories told in dim taverns on stormy nights. The war had left its ghosts, people said, and some still worked their endless shifts below the ground. Yet every decade, someone new would swear they'd heard the same sound, a low vibration, steady as a heartbeat, coming from the sealed earth. Whether it was a trick of nature or the echo of something man-made, no one could say. But the mountain kept its secret, and those who listened too closely found it listening back. For decades, the disappearance of Colonel Adler and his men was chalked up to chaos, the fog of war swallowing yet another ghost. But in 1997, the opening of Soviet wartime archives revealed a thread that would twist the story into something far stranger. Among hundreds of yellowing field reports and intercepted communiques was one dated April 15, 1945, from a Red Army observation post near Leipzig. It described a column of 12 German transport trucks, unmarked, moving west under cover of darkness. The convoy was escorted by armed SS personnel and carried sealed crates of scientific materials and unknown passengers. The truck's destination, the Harz Mountains. A follow-up dispatch noted that Soviet reconnaissance aircraft attempted to track the convoy the next day, but lost visual contact as it entered heavy fog. None of the vehicles were ever seen again. No wreckage, no surrender, nothing. Western intelligence never knew of the report until it surfaced more than 50 years later. When analysts compared the coordinates with declassified British reconnaissance imagery from April 1945, they discovered something chilling. Faint tire tracks leading into a valley near Braunlage, and none leading out. The terrain there was riddled with cave systems, many of them natural, some expanded by wartime mining. Yet surveys conducted after the war showed no evidence of a tunnel large enough for vehicles. The earth had sealed itself clean. What exactly had those trucks been carrying? Inventory manifests found in another Soviet dossier listed equipment requisitioned by Colonel Adler only weeks before the fall of Berlin: diesel generators, steel drums of coolant, and containers marked with hazard sigils. One cryptic line: Referenzt Projekt Morgenröte, Phase 2. Historians speculated the cargo might have included experimental engines or prototype weapons. Others whispered about something more metaphysical, occult research, psychic warfare, or whatever the Reich had hoped would secure its new dawn. In the early 2000s, satellite analysis of the same region revealed a series of geometric depressions in the forest floor, symmetrical, like the pattern of parking bays. They matched the scale of military trucks. Geologists confirmed the soil above them was denser than surrounding ground, as though reinforced. The data raised one impossible question: had the convoy simply driven into the mountain? If so, who or what opened the way? It began, as so many rediscoveries do, with the blade of a plow. In the spring of 1982, a farmer named Rolf Metzger was tilling his field outside Elland, a quiet village in the Harz foothills. When his tractor struck something solid, he assumed it was a rock. Digging it free, he unearthed a small, rust-eaten metal box no larger than a lunch tin, sealed tight with corroded hinges. Inside, wrapped in a mildewed scrap of cloth, lay several water-damaged documents, a cracked photograph, and a diary bound in black leather. At the bottom was a small iron key stamped with an insignia, an eagle clutching a rising sun. The same mark found in Adler's destroyed headquarters. The diary's handwriting was neat, deliberate, its pages dated between February and April 1945. Each entry chronicled the movements of Kommando Morgenröte, a unit operating under Colonel Hans Adler. The tone grew more frantic as the weeks passed. Mentions of sub-levels nearing completion, supplies running low, and finally, a line written in trembling script: "The circle is sealed. We wait for the new dawn." The farmer turned the materials over to local authorities, who forwarded them to historians at Göttingen University. For months, the find drew little notice until a researcher recognized the name Adler and the identical sun emblem found in old intelligence files. Within weeks, whispers spread through academic circles. The media caught on, and soon conspiracy theorists descended upon the Harz, convinced the diary was proof of a secret Nazi sanctuary buried beneath the mountains. Government officials tried to contain the frenzy, dismissing it as another wartime curiosity. Yet several details from the diary corresponded precisely with declassified British records, coordinates, supply shipments, and even the timing of the missing convoy. More unsettling were the passages that seemed almost prophetic, referring to the sleepers below and the hum that never stops. The iron key was tested. It fit nothing known. But metallurgists determined it was forged from an unusual alloy, high in tungsten and nickel, used primarily for experimental machinery. When journalists asked where the box was now, officials said it had been misplaced in storage. Those who'd seen it firsthand weren't so sure. To them, it felt less like an accident and more like a quiet burial of the past resurfacing once again, clawing up through the dirt to remind the world that the circle, perhaps, had never truly been broken. For decades, the mystery of Colonel Adler's last whereabouts rested on scattered rumors and a handful of burned documents. Then, in 2003, a retired cryptologist named Dr. Anke Weiss uncovered something no one had noticed before. While reviewing high-resolution scans of Adler's recovered diary, she spotted faint indentations beneath the visible writing, impressions left by a stylus or pencil pressed from the opposite page. Using multispectral imaging, she revealed a sequence of numbers interspersed with symbols resembling navigation markers. When translated, the coordinates pointed directly to a dense section of forest just outside Braunlage, deep within the Harz region. Weiss assumed it was a simple cartographic note until she cross-referenced it with wartime maps. The coordinates didn't correspond to any known installation or structure. But when she overlaid them onto declassified Royal Air Force aerial photos from 1945, she noticed something peculiar. A pattern of shallow depressions forming a perfect circle nearly 200 meters wide. At its center, the forest canopy was darker, thicker, as if concealing an unnatural sinkhole. Later images taken decades apart showed the same anomaly, growing denser with time, yet never fully disappearing. When Weiss attempted to visit the area, she found it inaccessible. A newly erected chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, adorned with government placards, warning of ecological restoration work. Locals whispered otherwise. They claimed the barrier had gone up overnight, guarded for several weeks by unmarked trucks. Those who tried to get close reported hearing faint mechanical sounds beneath the soil, a rhythmic hum like distant turbines. Weiss presented her findings to a university panel, but her proposal for excavation was denied without explanation. Within months, her grant funding vanished. Officially, the area was classified as a sensitive wildlife preserve. Unofficially, it became a dead zone. Yet curiosity never sleeps. Amateur historians began to trade the coordinates in secret forums, comparing the topography to sketches found in the so-called Morgenröte files. Everything aligned: the missing convoy, the sealed tunnels, the supposed underground hum. To most, it was coincidence, but to a select few who had followed Adler's trail for years, it was proof of something buried, something built to last. They called it the Circle of Dawn, and they believed it was still there, waiting for someone bold or foolish enough to break it open. Nearly 80 years after Colonel Adler vanished, technology finally caught up with his ghost. In the summer of 2024, a small group of urban explorers calling themselves Harz Anomaly Research Division, or HARD, announced plans to survey the restricted Braunlage forest. Led by former geology student Lucas Brandt, the team used portable ground-penetrating radar and drone-mounted LiDAR scanners to map what the government refused to acknowledge. Their equipment began picking up dense metallic reflections nearly 30 meters below the surface, long corridors, square chambers, and what looked unmistakably like a rail line vanishing into solid rock. "It's not a cave," Brandt whispered in one of the recordings. "It's engineered." Over 3 nights, they documented everything: faint magnetic interference, low-frequency vibrations that spiked near midnight, and even the echo of hollow space beneath their feet. On the 4th night, one of their drones captured infrared footage of an anomaly, a rectangular outline, perfectly symmetrical, half buried under moss and roots. When the team dug around it, they uncovered what appeared to be a reinforced steel door, its surface etched with corrosion and a faint engraving of the rising sun. They didn't try to open it. They didn't get the chance. According to the surviving members' testimony, the ground beneath them began to vibrate. A deep mechanical hum rose from below, steady, pulsing, like breath through a giant lung. Spooked, they packed up and fled, leaving behind one of their data drives. Within days, snippets of the footage appeared online, grainy images showing the door, the rails, and a vast subterranean chamber lined with rusted girders. The clips spread across Reddit and YouTube before vanishing, taken down under claims of copyright violations. Only a few frames survived, mirrored and re-uploaded by anonymous users. In one of them, for just half a second, a symbol is visible on the metal surface, an eagle clutching a rising sun. Adler's insignia. Official agencies never acknowledged the footage. Journalists who reached out to the HARD team found most of them unwilling to speak. Lucas Brandt simply said, "We saw something that wasn't supposed to be found. And someone made sure we didn't find it again." Whatever was hidden beneath Braunlage had stirred once more, and for the first time in 80 years, the world was listening. For months after the HARD footage vanished, only fragments of truth floated through online forums, still frames, pixelated outlines, and a faint emblem that kept historians arguing. Most dismissed it as a hoax, but one man refused to let it go. Dr. Elias Voss, a historian specializing in post-war intelligence archives, had spent years chasing rumors of Adler's underground network. When he recognized the insignia on the leaked footage, the same eagle and rising sun found in declassified MI6 reports, he decided to follow the coordinates himself. By early autumn, he was in Braunlage. Using the leaked GPS metadata buried in one of the surviving clips, Voss triangulated the site to a slope deep within the restricted forest. The air was heavy with pine and rain. The ground, uneven and overgrown, showed no signs of disturbance. But after hours of searching, his metal detector pinged against something solid, a dull, resonant sound beneath the moss. Clearing the surface revealed a steel hatch, nearly 2 meters across, camouflaged by decades of dirt and roots. Its hinges were fused, its handle sealed by corrosion, but the edges were unmistakably man-made. With help from a local engineer, Voss rigged a makeshift pulley and forced the hatch open. A rush of stale air hissed upward, thick with the stench of oil, iron, and something older. Decay buried too long. The opening revealed a narrow spiral staircase, the metal slick with condensation, vanishing into total darkness. When their flashlights cut through the gloom, the walls glittered faintly with frost, as though the cold itself had never left. Step by step, they descended. The deeper they went, the quieter the world above became. 40 steps down, the temperature dropped sharply. 60 steps, and the air turned dense, metallic. At the bottom, they found a heavy blast door marked with Adler's insignia, its paint flaking but intact. The door groaned open on ancient hinges, and their beams fell across a sight that made the group fall silent. The chamber beyond was perfectly preserved, desks covered in maps, lamps still standing, dust undisturbed. A clipboard lay on the floor dated April 28, 1945. One corner of the room was stacked with crates bearing the words Projekt Morgenröte, Phase 2. Everything was frozen in time, as if the men who'd once worked there had stepped away for only a moment. The war had ended above, but down here it had simply paused. The deeper they explored, the stranger it became. The bunker wasn't a ruin, it was a time capsule, sealed against decay. Maps lay pinned to corkboards, their edges crisp despite the years. Each one detailed the surrounding mountains with precision, annotated with red lines that converged toward a single symbol, a rising sun. Along the walls hung gas masks, their glass lenses fogged but unbroken. Uniforms neatly folded bore Adler's insignia, the same winged sun stitched into every sleeve. There were no signs of struggle, no bullet holes, no signs of collapse. It was as though the entire place had been deliberately preserved, waiting for discovery. Then came the mural, painted across the far wall in bold crimson strokes. Morgenröte begins below. Beneath the words, the image of the sun cresting over a horizon of black mountains, its rays descending into the earth rather than rising from it. The crates stacked beneath the mural were labeled with serial numbers, long missing from Allied recovery logs, assets marked unaccounted for since 1945. Inside were rusted instruments, vacuum tubes, and glass canisters filled with a yellowish residue. Some contained rolled papers sealed with wax and stamped with the initials HA. Others rattled faintly, as if holding metal fragments. Near the command desk, Voss's flashlight caught something out of place. A human shape, slumped over, its uniform still immaculate. A skeletal hand rested on a typewriter. On the desk sat an open journal, the ink faint but legible. Signal maintained. Power low. The colonel remained steadfast. Dawn will come beneath, not above. The team said nothing. One of them snapped a single photograph before the batteries died, plunging them into darkness. The air grew heavy, charged, as though the bunker itself was listening. Somewhere deeper inside, a low hum reverberated through the steel. It was the same sound the explorers from 2024 had described, the slow, steady pulse of machinery that should have stopped 8 decades ago. When they finally climbed back to the surface, dawn was breaking through the trees. The hatch was sealed behind them, the metal still trembling faintly under their hands. Whatever Adler's men had built down there, it was still alive. And now, after all these years, it was awake again. 2 days after the bunker's discovery, federal investigators quietly arrived in Braunlage. The site was sealed off under the guise of a geological hazard zone, though the truth was far stranger. Dr. Elias Voss was escorted from the area and ordered to hand over all photographs and artifacts. In exchange, he was promised access to the official findings once the assessment phase concluded. That access never came. What happened next would be pieced together from leaked reports and whispered accounts of those who entered after him. When specialists from the Federal Archive and Bundeswehr Engineering Corps descended into the bunker, they discovered a communications chamber connected to a generator that somehow still held a faint charge. In the corner sat a reel-to-reel recorder, its spools intact, its tape brittle but recoverable. Technicians restored the device and played back its final recording. The room reportedly went silent as the sound of static filled the air, followed by a voice, measured, calm, unmistakably German. Berlin has fallen. We remain loyal. Project Dawn continues beneath the earth. The date, April 30th, 1945. The same day Hitler's death was announced. There were more recordings, each shorter than the last. One officer reported decreasing oxygen levels. Another mentioned light from the lower chamber and reduced morale. The final tape ended with a phrase whispered so quietly that analysts could barely make it out. We will not ascend. After that, silence. No sign of a power failure, no abrupt cutoff, only the lingering hiss of empty air. Forensic teams found signs that the blast doors had been sealed from the inside. No evidence of forced entry, no spent cartridges, no footprints leading out. The investigators realized the bunker hadn't been abandoned at all. It had been entombed deliberately. Why would Adler and his men choose to seal themselves underground while the world above collapsed? Historians speculated that they saw themselves as guardians of their research, protectors of something too dangerous to let fall into Allied hands. But one detail unsettled even the skeptics. The internal generator still emitted a faint mechanical pulse, as if something down there was still drawing power. The bunker had been asleep, not dead. And that old message, looping through static and shadow, carried a chilling truth. Project Dawn never ended. It had simply gone quiet. When the investigators pushed deeper beyond the main operations room, they entered a second sector sealed by a reinforced pressure door. Behind it lay a warren of laboratories that defied their expectations. Not crude wartime workshops, but sterile chambers designed for advanced research. Despite the decades, the air inside was strangely cold, almost refrigerated. Frost clung to the pipes, and a fine film of ice covered the instruments, as though the bunker had been preserving itself. Along one wall stood a series of prototype devices, coils of copper tubing, vacuum chambers, and glass cylinders wired to dormant consoles. One machine resembled a generator, but emitted a faint electromagnetic field even after 80 years. Labels on the equipment read Morgenröte Phase 2, energetische Umwandlung, energy conversion. The implication was staggering. On a nearby desk, investigators found stacks of notebooks written in Adler's own hand. The entries mentioned Die Fortsetzung phase, the continuation phase, and Nachkriegswiederkehr, post-war re-emergence. The notes described the preservation of personnel, data, and power sources until the time of restoration. Some passages hinted at a sustained light reaction capable of generating near-infinite power, technology that wouldn't be publicly theorized until decades later. Deeper still, they uncovered storage crates containing mechanical prototypes and metallic fragments that defied identification. One bore an inscription etched directly into the steel, Für die Morgendämmerung, for the dawn. Within hours, the tone of the investigation shifted. Military intelligence agents arrived unannounced, escorted by plainclothes officials who ordered immediate containment. Certain notebooks and devices were crated and removed before any photographs could be taken. Official reports later described the contents as unstable munitions, though the scientists present swore none of it resembled weaponry. The rest of the lab was sealed behind welded steel plates. No further excavation was permitted. Unofficially, personnel were instructed not to speak of what they'd seen. But one anonymous engineer later claimed to have watched as one of the confiscated crates was loaded onto a black truck marked with NATO insignia. Inside, he glimpsed a glass cylinder glowing faintly from within, cold light pulsing like a heartbeat. Whatever the Reich had built in those final days, it hadn't died with its makers. It was still waiting, humming beneath the frost, patient as the dawn it was meant to bring. When excavation resumed, forensic experts were granted limited access to the lower corridors of the bunker, what the engineers called Sector 3. The deeper they descended, the stronger the metallic odor became, mingled with something older. Rust, oil and decay preserved by cold, dry air. The first chamber they opened appeared to be a meeting room of sorts. Its walls were lined with faded banners, each marked with the emblem of the rising sun. In the center lay 14 skeletal figures, still dressed in the remains of Wehrmacht uniforms. The bones were brittle, bleached white, but the positioning of the bodies was unmistakable. They were seated upright, forming a perfect circle. None had gunshot wounds. None showed evidence of struggle. On the ground before each skeleton lay a sidearm, cleaned and polished, but unfired. It was as though they had gathered deliberately, awaiting orders that never came. In the middle of the circle rested a uniform folded with ceremonial care. The insignia on the collar read, Oberst Hans Adler. Beside it, a rusted Luger pistol, magazine full, one round missing. Beneath the weapon was a single sheet of paper, water-stained yet still legible. "The dawn is not above, but within. We will join it below." DNA analysis confirmed what the inscription suggested. Adler was among the dead. But something didn't fit. The remains attributed to him lacked a skull fragment consistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. And the missing bullet, the one that should have ended his life, was never recovered. Forensic teams also noted the strange uniformity of the scene. The circle's geometry was exact to the centimeter. Candle stubs made from paraffin were found between each pair of bodies, their wicks unburned. Around the room's perimeter, chalk markings formed symbols reminiscent of astrological charts. Experts called it ritualized suicide, though no chemical agents were detected. Others suggested starvation, hypoxia, or deliberate poisoning. But none explained why the scene appeared staged, almost sacred, as if the men believed they were preparing for a passage rather than death. As the team worked, instruments recorded intermittent vibrations beneath the chamber floor, low, rhythmic pulses that seemed to follow no mechanical pattern. When they drilled for samples, their tools briefly jammed on something metallic. They never found out what it was. Moments later, the order came down to stop excavation. The site was to be closed immediately, and within a week, the dead were sealed once again in the dark they had chosen for themselves. The public never heard about the bodies. Within days of the discovery, the operation's name was changed from Braunlage Excavation to a bland internal code, Site 47A. Reports were reclassified, and all civilian personnel were required to sign lifetime non-disclosure agreements. Those who asked questions were reassigned, or quietly dismissed. The official story released to the press claimed that the dig had been halted due to unstable terrain and contamination concerns. But behind closed doors, governments began to argue. Leaked memos later revealed that British and American intelligence immediately claimed jurisdiction over several recovered artifacts, citing post-war cooperative agreements. German authorities objected, insisting the bunker fell under domestic control. A NATO task force intervened, citing joint security interests. The argument stretched across months, while the contents of the bunker were quietly divided, catalogued, and shipped to separate facilities. In the nearby villages, strange activity followed. Roads leading into the forest were blocked. Residents reported convoys of unmarked trucks moving through the night, their headlights blacked out. Helicopters hovered over the ridge for hours at a time. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Within weeks, the hatch was sealed, the tunnels filled with concrete, and the entire hillside declared off-limits under an environmental preservation order. New trees were planted, fresh soil laid down. The mountain was once again left to heal or to hide. But some things cannot be buried. Several of the investigators who entered the bunker later spoke anonymously to journalists. They described hearing a persistent hum, faint but constant, echoing from beneath the concrete long after the site had been closed. One engineer swore he saw frost form on the floor around his boots as he stood above the chamber of bodies. Another claimed his compass spun in circles whenever he approached the former entrance. None of these testimonies made it into the official record. The ministry dismissed them as psychological fatigue. Yet the locals still whisper that on cold nights, if you stand near the edge of the forest, you can feel the ground tremble, slow, steady, mechanical, as if the mountain itself were breathing. And sometimes, just before dawn, the air carries a low vibration, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing in rhythm with the earth. Whatever Colonel Adler built beneath Braunlage, it was never meant to stop. And the hum that rises from the depths is not an echo. It's a reminder that Project Morgenröte, Project Dawn, never truly ended. 80 years have passed since Colonel Hans Adler and his men vanished beneath the Harz Mountains, yet the echoes of Project Morgenröte still pulse through history like a hidden current. Files remain sealed, testimonies redacted, and witnesses long gone. What little has surfaced is fragmented, pieces of a puzzle that refuse to fit. But one truth endures. Whatever Adler built in those final desperate days of the war, it was not meant to be found. Historians have tried to decode the project's purpose for decades. Some believe it was Germany's final attempt at a doomsday weapon, an underground energy reactor meant to power a last stand against the Allies. Others argue the research went far beyond warfare. In the recovered notebooks, Adler often wrote not of victory, but of continuation, as if he believed his work would outlive him, guiding the world into a new era. His equations and blueprints reference concepts that wouldn't appear in mainstream science until the 1960s: magnetic confinement, plasma stability, and sustained reaction chains. Was Adler on the verge of developing cold fusion, an energy source capable of reshaping civilization? Or had his ambitions drifted into something darker, something beyond the boundary of science? Notes from his final experiments refer to resonant energy within organic systems and conversion of spirit to matter. To some, it sounds like a physicist's metaphor. To others, it reads like a ritual. In the years since the bunker's closure, strange patterns have emerged. Satellite surveys continue to detect low-level electromagnetic activity beneath Braunlage. Local wildlife avoids the area, and trees near the old site grow in warped spirals, as though twisting away from something underground. Occasionally, hikers still claim to hear a faint hum when the wind is still, steady, mechanical, and impossibly deep. Governments deny any ongoing research. The official record lists Project Morgenröte as an unverified wartime myth. Yet, leaked procurement forms from the early 2000s mention energy stability studies conducted under NATO supervision, funded by the same organizations that seized Adler's equipment in 1945. Perhaps the most haunting mystery isn't what Adler built, but why he built it. Did he believe he was saving his people, creating a new form of life? Or was he simply trying to outlast the world he knew was ending? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: the ground still holds his secret. Beneath the forests of Germany, the past hums quietly, patient as stone, waiting for the next curious soul to listen. He vanished into history, but history never forgot him. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.